Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another review video here on the channel. I'm back with another slightly late 2024 release video. I'm also recovering from a cough, if you didn't already know, so that's why my voice sounds like this. I'm so sorry. Today we are going to be talking about Robert Jackson Bennett's latest book, The Tainted Cup. This is the cover. This is what it looks like. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I was sent a digital review copy of this book for free from the publisher, regardless of where books come from. Nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I will keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible while still talking about the book as a whole, and I'll link the story graph for the book down below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. This is a dark mystery crime fantasy book from author Robert Jackson Bennett. It came out in February, on the 6th of February, so I'm very late. Over a month late. It's fine. If you haven't heard of Robert Jackson Bennett before, I would highly suggest checking out my other videos on his series. I have one for the Divine Cities trilogy. That is up, I believe. And I also have one for the Founders trilogy, which is one of my favourite trilogies of all time. So I would suggest checking those out if you haven't already. This is, however, a totally new series, totally new book. You don't need to have read any of those to read this. Broadly speaking, we are in a fantasy world where a lot of the political system seems to be Roman Empire inspired, or at least they're using Latin terms for things. But the world itself is mushroom core. It's in a kind of a non-cozy way. There's a lot of mold, there's a lot of fungus, there's a lot of moistness. The idea of contagion, of spores is all happening in this world. And we have a Holmes and Watson almost detective pairing trying to solve a crime. A high up imperial officer has been murdered, but in a fairly gruesome way, in that he was kind of just around at this house and a tree spontaneously grew out of him. The story's told through the perspective of the Watson character, the detective's assistant, and while investigating the crime, they and their detective become caught up in a much larger political scandal that's going on. It's a potential scheme to take down the empire itself, which is already struggling to defend itself against the enormous leviathans that keep coming out of the ocean and trying to get to land and kind of kill and eat everybody. There's a lot going on. The other thing that I should note at the point of the plot is that this assistant character is modified in the way that people are modified in this world, that they never forget anything. They remember everything they see. I think that's everything that you need to know, or that I can tell you before we get into why I think you should read this. One of the hallmarks of Robert Jackson Bennett's other works has been his detailed world building, in particular with consideration to magic and kind of the minutiae of how a world works. The Founders trilogy has it in the scribing mechanism for magic. Divine Cities has it in its relationship to deities. In this case, I would say it's plants and the mushroom side of things that's really interesting for me in this, and I think it's going to be something that plays a much bigger part later on. I really liked the way in which the various plants and so such were used as clues in the mystery. That worked very well. And this general sense of a world that is quite moist and dark and fungal was really well handled. I thought it was a really interesting choice to juxtapose that with this kind of imperial military world as well. I feel like those are two things that don't generally get meshed together, and in this it worked very well to see them next to one another. I feel like we're in a world where the mushroom is having its day, and I appreciate that. I love a detective novel. I grew up on detective shows. I still love a good crime procedural. I'll have a great time with it. So I really like this. I haven't read a lot of the classic detective books, I'll say right now. We have this very eccentric detective who is so good at her job but needs a lot of assistance, and the assistant who is sort of slightly despairing but also needs this job, and that's a dynamic I very much enjoyed. They're in a very dire situation. There's a very much that strong sense of threat going on throughout the whole book, both from the fact that they are caught up in a conspiracy and also the potential for leviathans, and yet they still manage to have a lot of humour and a lot of fun. And I'm really interested to see in future books in the series how their relationship develops. I don't mean in a romantic sense. It's sort of like not even a platonic relationship at this point. It's a business relationship, but it's very interesting. I like the chemistry between them. Again, not romantic chemistry, but there is a really good dynamic between the two of them. I think if you're writing a book that's going to be marketed on this Holmes and Watson idea, you have to do it well, and I felt like this managed it well. And we've met great Robert Jackson Bennett characters before in other things. I'm not surprised I liked these characters. But is it a good murder mystery? That's the question. If you're selling me a detective book, is the detective story good? Are the clues fun? Do they make sense? Is the pacing right? Yes. I would say yes. There were a few things that genuinely surprised me when they were revealed. There were a few things that I got just as the detective was getting it, which is my favourite way something can be paced. I just thought it was a really interesting story. Again, don't know how that will play out with future books, whether we'll get more discrete cases as books go on, or if it will be more of a, we've done a case now, let's look at the world. Interested to find out. I would say if you enjoy a crime book, if you enjoy a dark fantasy, it will work for you. I liked it. As with a lot of fantasy books where the world is very different, where you're not just doing generic fantasy Europe, it is a little bit slow to start. There's a lot of information to take in. You're very much thrown in at the deep end because it's assuming the knowledge of this main character where you don't have that knowledge yet. As I say with most books like this, let it take you. You'll go on the journey, you'll figure things out as you need to know them, and there's obviously still loads more to find out as we go, but do bear that slow start in mind. It also felt much denser than his other books, at least to me. I felt like Foundryside was a very easy read. Tainted Cup took me much longer to get into. However, I have read probably 50% less this year as a whole, so that might be more of a comment on my reading ability and my brain capacity than anything else. It was less of a romp from the start. It was much more of a, we're here, there's bad things going on, there's things happening in the world, where Foundryside I felt had a more fun start, where Divine Cities was a bit more magical perhaps. I don't know, maybe that was just me. Maybe on a reread I would feel differently. I'll also reiterate that you probably want to check out the content warnings for this. I'll throw out a mild one for body horror. There's some body horror stuff that happens. We got plants growing out of people. There's a lot of violence and murder and such happening. I think for most people it would be fine. It's not a horror book by any means, but it does have those dark fantasy elements to it. Overall, I had a wonderful time reading this by the end. I was really invested. I really enjoyed it once I got going. I think that it's a really solid book, and at the time of reading it, I didn't feel much Robert Jackson Bennet about it, especially in comparison to his other books. Now I'm out the other side, I can see all of those similarities, that detail, that quirkiness, that interesting, what's the word? Meat to the world, the characters, it's all there. And I do think it sits really nicely alongside his other books. Speaking of comparisons, if you haven't already read them, read the Founders trilogy, just do it. Read Foundryside, you'll have the best time. Divine Cities is great too, but I recommend Founders trilogy to pretty much everyone all the time. Other things you might want to read, I do think there's a lot of T. Kingfisher to be compared in this. I would say more her horror than any of the other elements, but I do think that's like slightly quirky, a little bit humorous, but still dark tone definitely pings off this for me. The other person that this made me think of was Aliette de Bodard. I think she does similar interesting things with World, and a lot of her characters felt very familiar to me. There was just a sense in this of Aliette de Bodardness. I'll link a review for one of her series as well, so you can check that out. And obviously she has a Holmes and Watson story, though that one is set in space, so it is a little bit different. I wonder also maybe Winnowing Flame? Maybe a little bit of Winnowing Flame in there as well? Perhaps? Should you read The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennet? Yes, I think you should. I think if you've read his other stuff and liked it, you'll probably like this. I think if you like a detective novel, you'll like it. If you like a fantasy novel, you'll like it. Oh, maybe even City of Lies is another good example. That's got a good mystery plot in a fantasy world as well. Oh, so many good things to compare it to. I really enjoyed it. I would read it again. I would buy a physical copy if I were buying books at the moment. I'd be really interested to see what happens in other books. If we can get a synopsis for the next one, I'll be interested to know, because I think that will set how I feel about the series as a whole, maybe, depending on the direction. But overall, yes, I would recommend. If you've not read it already, you probably should. Have you read this? Do you have plans to? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You could also come hang out on Discord, where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. So one of the hallmarks of Robert Jackson winnings